Marketing is possibly becoming one of the most important transformation levers in the organization, and sometimes perhaps a little bit still underestimated because it's still seen as a function, right? But today, marketing sits at the intersection of customer insight, narrative, data, and increasingly AI. And that's a very exciting place to be. Also, it gives us a unique mandate because that I would say most organizations are underutilizing. So the role is not so much to support transformation, but it's actually to design and accelerate it across a number of different areas.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Asia AIM, the podcast that shines a light on the people, ideas, and innovation shaping business, marketing, and communications in Japan and across the APAC region. I'm your host, Robert Held. Today's episode is a very special one because we're talking about transformation, but through the lens that goes through marketing into leadership, storytelling, and purpose. I'm joined by Dr. Laura Bonamici, former Senior Vice President and Global Head of Marketing at Fujitsu. Laura has led a truly global, multicultural marketing organization, driving everything from brand strategy and demand generation to thought leadership and analytics. What's fascinating about Laura's journey is how diverse it is. Starting a career at Goldman Sachs in London, to working with Silicon Valley startups entering Europe, to leading one of the most significant brand transformations at Fujitsu. She also brings a very unique perspective with a PhD focused on storytelling and digital technologies, something that really comes through in how she thinks about marketing today. In our conversation, we will explore what it takes to drive enterprise-wide transformation, how leadership needs to evolve in times of constant change, and how AI is reshaping marketing without losing the human element. So let's get right into it. Laura, I'm so delighted to welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the lovely introduction.
You're welcome, yeah. You've had such a fantastic, diverse journey from Goldman Sachs to startups, and most recently, leading global marketing at Fujitsu. Looking back, what are the experiences that have most shaped how you lead today?
I often say that I started my career what I call a corporate gym. I was in an environment like you said, like Goldman Sachs, where the standards are incredibly high. So you build discipline very, very quickly. And you learn how to perform, you learn how to deliver, and how to handle pressure. But I think what shaped it the most is definitely my career, my last 14 years with Fujitsu, and especially the move to Japan, because suddenly everything that you know and all the things that you take for granted, how you communicate, how you make decisions, or how decisions are made, how teams interact, you have to question all of that. And I remember when I landed in Japan in 2022, bear in mind at that point I'd been with the company for 10 years, so I knew the company quite well. I'd been to Japan 37 times, so it wasn't completely new. But I remember thinking, oh my goodness, I might have all the right answers here, but that's not actually the point. So the real question was, how can I create environments where others feel comfortable contributing, especially across languages and across cultural differences, and that I think is what reshaped my leadership the most. So today, I would say that I lead at the intersection of strategy, culture, and people, particularly in complex cross-cultural environments where alignment and trust are absolutely critical.
Yeah, especially in a country like Japan and working for a Japanese company like Fujitsu, right? So when we talk about transformation, it's often used very broadly, but how do you define transformation in the context of the role you've just had at Fujitsu?
I think you're right. Sometimes transformation is not positioned in the right way. So it's seen and perceived as a set of initiatives. And if you look at it from the operational lenses, that's probably right, because you need to operationalize that side as well. But for me, transformation is when organizations start thinking differently and therefore behaving differently. And specifically to the journey that I've been on with Fujitsu, when the current CEO, Tokita-san, when he came on board in 2019, it was very clear from the beginning that he wanted to drive what I would describe a really holistic, systemic transformation. And it's been relentless, it's not backed off, at any point. So it was a transformation across how we engage customers, the business model, the technology portfolio, and importantly also the people side of transformation. So we started this journey in 2019. If you cast your mind back, the last 7 years, been quite eventful. A lot of anxiety, the pandemic, a lot of turbulence. And I love there's a quote by Peter Drucker that says that the greatest danger in times of turbulence is to act with yesterday's logic. And I think when you're in the middle of so much change and technological change, geopolitical shifts, so different social expectations, I think it's very easy to default to tools and mindsets of the past because they give you that kind of confidence, but they're not ultimately what's going to be successful. So for us as a technology company, operating with yesterday's logic was just looking at technology and efficiencies alone, and that we realized was not going to be enough. So our journey, I would say, was 3 interconnected areas. We started with purpose, so declaring our purpose as a company. Then we became much more data-driven, like many organizations, of course. And then the third element was AI, of course, and how AI could elevate what we did. And I think it's the combination of the 3 that really made the transformation not just possible, but also powerful. When I look back, of course, we talk a lot about technology, inevitably when we look at data, when we look at AI, but ultimately the shift is as cultural as it is technological. And the role for us in marketing was twofold, I would say. The first one was to make sure that the brand really accompanied, evolved in line with the new strategy and the purpose that we set, and specifically to us, our focus on sustainability. And the second piece was making transformation real. So having an operational model that was built around capability, mindset, and culture change, that digital infrastructure that you need, and ultimately performance. And connecting all these elements, I think, is what made the biggest difference. Because again, if you treat them as separate work stream, then that's how people perceive them, and it's never going to be holistic, which was really the intention.
Yeah, I think you said it really nicely there. Marketing plays a really important role in enterprise-wide transformation today, right? But as that role evolved in the recent years, what have you seen, having been in marketing for quite a prominent time in your career?
I would say that the role has definitely evolved. And I mean, of course, I'm a marketer, right? So maybe I'm a little bit biased, but marketing is possibly becoming one of the most important transformation levers in the organization, and sometimes perhaps a little bit still underestimated because it's still seen as a function, right? But today, marketing sits at the intersection of customer insight, narrative, data, and increasingly AI. And that's a very exciting place to be. Also, it gives us a unique mandate because that I would say most organizations are underutilizing. So the role is not so much to support transformation, but it's actually to design and accelerate it across a number of different areas. For example, if we talk about the strategic narrative, the role of marketing is to define that strategic narrative, not just what we say, but also how we do it. And I think in a world where there's so much AI-generated noise, that coherence become really a competitive advantage. So it's about aligning leadership, products and services, culture behind a single credible story that we can use in the market. There's also a change. I'm going to talk a lot about behaviors because that's one of my one of the things that I'm passionate about. But today the unit of impact, real impact, is not impressions. Really is behaviors. And marketing, of course, we are trained, right, to to apply this to not just externally but also internally. We can influence how the sales organization sells, how the leaders communicate, how employees show up in the market. Because ultimately, if all of those behaviors don't change, then transformation is not happening, and that's one of my biggest lessons. The
Yeah.
final thing that I would say, so maybe just on brand specifically, because that has been such an important part of my journey, is that brand is really today more than ever the kind of trust architecture of the company. So how consistent we are, how credible we are in the market, and also how accountable the organization is across all these touch points that we have with the humans and with increasingly non-humans. So yeah, I would say that the role of marketing is changing, and our role is make all this transformation understandable, but also desirable and ultimately actionable.
Absolutely, yeah. And as you said, the transformation can often just stay at a strategy level, but making it actionable across teams, especially with multicultural teams, must be quite a challenge. So, what did you do to make it real and actionable in your team?
Yeah, that's. I think that ultimately is the $1 million question, because typically transformation doesn't fail on strategies, not the strategic thinking, but it's not even the execution, because as I said earlier, sometimes we operationalize, and that's quite through a set of initiatives, but it's more that kind of translation. So how do you translate the strategy into something that people can ultimately align behind, but also believe and remember and action? And getting teams on board is possibly the most the most challenging, but also the most rewarding. The rewarding side of transformation. For me, you do that through and with people, because you're not just talking about alignment, you're talking about fellowship. So you want people to follow you on that journey, and that really takes a village. That has been and increasingly a global village, right? Because we all have teams everywhere in the world, and you need different skills to some extent. So you need to set a strategic direction. So you need strategic clarity. That goes without saying. But you also need that human connection. And if you're leading across culture, that I would call it cross-cultural intelligence, and that becomes even more important. And then if you're in a big role, I mean, I have 500 people in my team. You need to be able to deliver this consistently across geographies and at all different levels of the organization. So yes, setting the strategy, that's the most important thing, which in many cases means simplifying complexity. That big organizations are complex. We try not to be, but inevitably we all are. And also there's a lot of ambiguity. So turning that ambiguity into something that can actually be executed and make a business impact. Then you need to create an environment where people feel seen, feel trusted, feel connected, and empowered to really do their best, right? Their best work. I think that's ultimately what really drives transformation, not the transformation programs, which we all love, because it's what shapes the behaviors, the mindset, and the ways of working. And then, yes, if you're in a global role, absolutely, that cultural element is a big factor. I like to think about it as dialing up to your radical curiosity, not just curiosity as a soft skill, but actually as a leadership discipline, because you really have to question your own assumptions. And and just realizing that in many cases you're going to be wrong, that you have to be open to perspectives that are going to challenge the way you see the world. So you have to be humble, especially in environments like Japan, where that trust, that respect, and also indirect influence is absolutely critical to success.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, because transformation ultimately is about people, and not just guiding people, but bringing them on the journey, right? And how has your leadership style changed and evolved as you led teams to these constant changes?
I think the biggest shift has been being very intentional about the people side. I think early on possibly in everybody's career, you're very focused on performance, on outcomes, on progress. And of course, all of those things matter. But my experience, especially over the last 4 years, is that if you're missing that connection, that focus on the people side, then the results might be there, but then they're never the results, the real transformation that you want to achieve. So that's probably been the biggest shift that I've made, and in the work that I've done here in Japan, that has probably been the way in which we've improved performance the most, because we shifted really the way in which the organization worked. There's been much more transparency. We've operated much more in a much more connected way. And funnily enough, language has played a big role. For anybody who comes to Japan, unless you're fluent in Japanese, which I'm not, obviously language barriers can be a challenge. And I came to Japan for 18 months. By the time I leave, it will be almost 4 years. So different mandate. I mean, I came here to drive change, but it was for a limited period of time. And then it got extended and then extended again. So which allowed me to really experience, to be on a bigger journey than I expected. So Laura didn't speak English. That was kind of like the first big worry for the team, and I didn't want that to be about me. So the fact that I had to speak English because I didn't speak Japanese, obviously for the Japan-based team members. So what I've done instead, I kind of I reframe it, to use a coaching term, and I position English as a marketing capability. So that was the shift that I wanted the team to make, because you cannot operate in a shared global language if you're not fully part of a global conversation, and especially if you're in marketing, you want to have access to the same ideas, the same perspectives. So that was my positioning of English as our common language, and that had a cultural impact. Cultural as in the culture of the team. It was almost like a psychological reset for the team, because it kind of reduced hierarchy. Quite often, the most junior member of the teams, they were the one they were more fluent, more comfortable, and it kind of shifted focus from who was speaking to what was being said, and so the real content of the conversation. So we had many more junior voices coming through, which for me was very exciting. There's so much talent in this country, so seeing them growing and developing a voice, beyond the language one, was really exciting. And in general, more openness and then kind of better decision as a result of that. So language not just as a communication tool, but also as something that can shape participation and ultimately access.
Yeah, very well said. And I like your point about making it's a global communication, right? It's not just isolated in the country. So it's really important to be able to have those global communication with your teams across countries. Yeah. I was really interested in how you described your early career as a corporate gym. How has that shaped your resilience and approach to leadership?
I think it builds a muscle. That's why I use the word as a gym. Many people see careers as a ladder, right? You move from this role to this role to that role. And my experience is actually that it's more like cross training. You go in this direction and then you go into this other direction, and you build different muscles that then ultimately become useful at different points in your career. For me, when I started, I think I was very fortunate to start that I started in that environment, because it was there was a lot of rigor. So that there's second nature to me. Yes, resilient, because the pace is relentless, and all of that you need, because leadership can be very lonely when you're at the top. You're on your own. If you're doing that, if you're leading away from home, which I've done all of my life. I never worked in Italy. I've always worked in other countries. It can feel even more isolating. So having those skills trained early on then help you to build to go through through what I would describe as the natural phases in life, not just in careers. It's not a straight line. That is at this level and it's always like that. It's that hero's journey, right? The things go wrong and you have to pick yourself up. So that was very important for me to have that early on in my career.
Yeah, and it really resonates with me. It's like, as you mentioned, a gym. You got to constantly go to keep in shape, to stay in shape, to stay at the best of your ability to deliver and be resilient. Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about storytelling. You've done a PhD in drama and theater studies, focusing on digital technologies and storytelling. How does that influence how you think about marketing?
It's absolutely how I think about marketing. Let's put it this way. And of course, because I come from that, it comes quite natural to me. But as I said earlier, there's so much content, so much information, so much coming at us that how do we stand out, and how do we make ourselves remembered as people and as companies, as brands? So storytelling is very much about meaning, not only about content. So we talked about strategy a minute ago. So that's storytelling is how strategy lands ultimately. Because you can have the best strategy in the world, but if people don't understand it, they don't connect to it. It just doesn't work. It's a given. So storytelling, I would say, it's a leadership tool, not just a marketing tool, and it has fundamentally shaped how I lead, especially. Again, sorry, I keep going back to Japan because it's been probably the biggest, more transformative time in my life. I would also kind of separate stories from storytellers. That there is a difference, because stories are everywhere. And if you're in marketing, you talk about customer wins, you talk about team efforts, you talk about moments of failures, breakthroughs in technology. But storytelling, I describe it as a leadership tool. So it's really the discipline of making those moments, those stories land and connecting with people. And if you're in a context like I have been for the last 4 years, where language and culture can easily create distance, then that distinction becomes really critical. And when words don't always translate perfectly, then storytelling becomes a bit of a bridge. So it allows you to simplify without dumbing down. So that I think is really important. It creates that kind of emotional clarity, even when linguistic clarity perhaps is still catching up, which happens a lot. So I've used it to really connect teams across cultures, across levels of the organization, and not just to be understood as a leader, but also to be remembered. Not me, Laura, but me, the messages that I wanted to share with the team. Because I think the real shift, and people underestimate this, is that understanding is temporary. You can come to me with data, with statistics, and I will understand it in the moment. But it's memory that drives action. So it's the remembering that moment, remembering that story, remember how I felt in that moment, that ultimately makes a difference. So as you said, that kind of comes natural to me because of my academic background. So I've always been drawn to narrative, to structure, and also to the power of what is expressed, not just what's being said. So that's the foundation of how I communicate as a leader.
Yeah, I like that emotional connection, right? You talk about, you can bring data, you can bring facts, but how does that connect with me? What's the emotion? What do I get out of this? And how do I communicate that, right? We talked a little bit about AI. AI is generating more and more and more content. So what role does storytelling play in helping brands to stand out?
I think it's a question that we're all trying to come to terms with. So there's so much out there, and we can create content so quickly. There's an abundance of content, but I would say the counterpoint to that is that meaning is becoming scarce. So definitely storytelling can help making forcing that clarity. So if you're a brand or an individual, so what do you stand for? What you don't stand for? How consistently you show up. So these are that's ultimately what creates differentiation. So that's how you can use storytelling in a very kind of busy, noisy, confusing time.
Yeah, and I think we are, at the risk of losing that authenticity, right? As content becomes more and more scalable. Any advice for what marketers should do to avoid losing that authentic voice and emotional connection?
One of the things that I always said to my team, and that connects to the work that we did as a company around purpose. was start with purpose, not with prompts. I think we've all become now used to putting a prompt into whichever tool we decide to use, and then take it from there. But actually, you need to take a step back and design with purpose in mind, because otherwise, first of all, we all sound the same. So that authenticity, that unique voice is lost. And also, it's almost like missing a step. You're kind of jumping to the to the next one without a clear brief. So if you start with purpose, and you start with purpose with real people, then you move to a prompt. That's probably what's going to keep you a little bit more distinctive.
Yeah, I think, yes, purpose is so important, because when you have purpose, you really know what you're trying to achieve and where you're going, right? And how to get there could be just a path. Yeah. So AI has been a part of marketing for many years, even before it became a big hype. But do you think we've reached an inflection point now? What's truly different now? What are you seeing in your world, because you've been in technology for quite a prominent part of your career?
Yeah, and you're right. AI in itself is not new, but obviously with LLMs, there's been a popularization and democratization, I would say, of the use of AI. What I'm seeing, again, it is an inflection point, and it is a big technological shift. But I will go back to my previous points. Ultimately, the biggest shift is the human shift. So what it is that we need to do to kind of engage with these new tools, because we've had new tools being introduced at different points in history. The way I think about it, for a long time, we've defined value through tangible things. So if you think about hiring somebody in your team, you would look at historically, you would have looked at their experience, the roles that they've had, the scale of responsibility, and those things, of course, still matter. But as AI is taking on more structured work, if you like, the differentiation becomes what we used to call kind of soft skills, which for me are actually core transformational skills. So the ability to read the room, the operating across different contexts, the ability to think creatively as well as critically, the ability to adapt if you're making a big shift. So those human capabilities, they become even more differentiated, and I put a lot of effort in honing those skills, not just a personal level, but also help the team make that transition so that they feel equipped to deal with the magnitude of the shift that we are experiencing.
Yeah. And where do you see AI creating the most meaningful impact in terms of marketing, and where is it being overhyped?
As a tool, I think it's incredibly powerful in what I would call accelerating exploration. So you can research, you can test, you can iterate much more quickly than we could. And that, of course, is great. But the real shift has to be how team operate. So it's not just about producing more, but it's about taking a step back and having that time for more strategic thinking, which I think is quite daunting for a lot of people, because we're so used to our historical timelines and the time that it takes to develop a campaign, and the way in which you engage with an agency or whatever it is that we used to do before. So now the rules of the game have changed quite significantly, so that space is opening up. But as I said, for some people that might feel like, okay, but what is it that I can bring, and how do I do it? So the role of leaders is also guiding the teams into this new territory, and that kind of connects to the way in which the areas in which is overhyped. And AI, well, today at least, I mean, this is changing every day, but today, and I hope for a long time, I think it's overhyped when it's expected to replace judgment. So I hope that humans stay in that seat for a very long time, and so AI is the co-pilot as opposed to the ultimate arbitrator and decision maker.
Yeah, these days you're seeing a lot more about what's the human connection, right? The human plus, how is human in the loop? That's the kind of thought process, I think, across industries, not just in marketing, that we're seeing, which is very important and very well said. So if you were advising marketing leaders today, what's the one mindset shift that they need to make to stay relevant in this new era, especially in this new AI era?
Maybe I'll go back to the radical curiosity point. So, because we lived in a world where all the answers are on tap, the real advantage is it's the ability to ask better questions. So to continue to do that and stay curious, because I think we are fortunate. We operate in a world, in a marketing world that is constantly changing, constantly evolving. With that comes also the responsibility to ask those questions, to test, to probe, to challenge.
Yeah, and at our agency, we've created a studio, internal studio called Better Problems Studio. So we get a client's problem and you look at, is that the problem? What is the better problem? Is there a better problem? So we keep drilling into what is the better problem, which leads you to think better questions. And then you actually see the real problem, which sometimes, as you said, the answers might right be there, but it's hard to see. So yeah, really well said. Laura, to close us out, I've got a quick fire round of questions for you. Is that okay?
Of course, go for it.
Great. One word you would use to describe marketing in 2026?
I'll stay consistent. Human.
AI, is it overhyped, underhyped, or are we just getting started?
Definitely just getting started.
Okay. And what's the most underrated skill for marketing leaders today?
The ability to stay present.
Okay. And if you had to choose one, would it be storytelling or data?
I think you know the answers are storytelling because it gives meaning to data.
That was a trick question on my side, but thank you for answering that. And what's the one piece of advice you'd give your younger self starting out in marketing today?
I would say stay curious, always lead with kindness, especially if you're leading across cultures, and worry less. I think when you're younger, you worry so much, and life has got a way of working itself out. So that would be my final piece of advice.
That is really good advice and something to give my daughter who's at university at the moment, and she worries too much. But that's really good advice. Yeah.
Same with mine.
Yeah. Laura, thank you so much. It's such a great conversation. We talked about a wide ranging of topics, and I truly appreciated how you brought transformation, storytelling, and leadership in such a grounded way. And it's really easy to get caught up in technology and the hype, but your perspective really brings it back to people. Purpose is a word that I think more leaders should use and focus on, and clarity. And I think your point around storytelling, especially in the age of AI, where content is endlessly being created, it's something that will really resonate with our listeners.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Robert.
Thank you very much for listening or watching the Asia AIM podcast. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And I'd also love for you to give us a review. Reviews make a huge difference in how other people find our show. Until next time, I'm your host, Robert Held, and I'll be back soon with more conversations on how to win in Asia's dynamic and diverse markets.
Thanks for tuning in to the Asia AIM podcast. If today's conversation sparked new ideas or insight, be sure to subscribe, rate, and share the show. For more resources, tips on doing business in Asia, or to book a meeting with our team, visit asiaimpodcast.com. Stay curious, stay connected, and we'll see you in the next episode of Asia AIM.